Hello, everybody. Happy day before Thanksgiving. I hope everyone is doing well. For those of you in the United States, anyway, getting ready for the big day, lots of food and family. And, well, unless you've got more than 10 people, you only have 10 people.
Anyway, getting ready for the big day.
So make sure you don't have any more than 10, 10 people for your um, uh, little Thanksgiving gathering if if that's what you're planning to do. Um, I know that our governor had asked us to try to limit our parties to 10 and if possible to do Zoom dinners. So is that crazy or what to have a Zoom dinner for Thanksgiving? I don't know, but whatever. Um, so can everybody hear me out there? Well, all three of you. Okay. I kind of misjudged the whole mm, uploading thing, and so I didn't quite I didn't realize it would take a lot longer than it took or than it takes to get to get a video uploaded. So after all the work that I did editing a video, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to use it, but it did finish uploading to the I don't know where it uploaded to, but it didn't upload into YouTube. So yeah, we're live. Okay. So it didn't well, so Kay, so I was just trying to explain my video that I edited and everything that we had done the presentation. It didn't upload because it takes a little while evidently to upload a video and stuff. So I I think it did just get uploaded, but there's no way that I could possibly get it uploaded to show. However, I think that I might be able to just go ahead and show it to you as because it is done now. So I can actually go ahead and show you we can present the edited one. We're just going to do it in a live format. So we'll be live, but you will be seeing. So I'm going to close out all these other tabs. I was all ready to go live, but now that that's completed uploading, I can at least show this part. So I'll go ahead and share this, but anyway, long story short, now it's ready to share with you live. So at least I don't feel like it went complete, that it, was a complete waste of time. So give me just 1 second to organize myself here. And Cherie, so I mean, you can stay in. Kay, you can go ahead and come in too if you'd like. I put the link in Discord in our chat. And so if you'd like, you can go ahead and come in, but we're really just going to kind of hopefully just go ahead and share the video that I did and see how it works. And so I'm going to go ahead and start that screen share. Those of you who are here, thank you so much for coming and taking time out of the day to do this. There's only 3 of us, so we should have a blast. We should be able to just have a quick little visit tonight and get this done and shared, and maybe people can watch it later in the replay. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I believe we'll start our little show. I want to make sure though that that everyone's aware that Cherie again has done most of the work on this, getting the slides done and started for me, and Kay, as always, really good to help with getting us links and information and all that good stuff. So we're going to I'm going to go ahead and play this here for you. But Cherie and I will kind of join Kay rather than doing any talking. We'll probably just go ahead and join Kay in the chat and kind of just try to do this like a premiere after all, if that's fine. If that's okay with you, Kat. It's just you and Kay and Cherie and I. So with that said, let's go ahead and get it started. Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening on our first premiere on my YouTube, Just Rhonda. And tonight we're going to give you the second part of what we started last week about DNA. And last week we talked about the six world-renowned scientists, biologists, and forensic analysts, and their opinions on the Daniel Holtzclaw case. And tonight, as promised, we're going to we're going to bring you quite a bit of information about Dr. Michael J. Spence, who was able to successfully attach an affidavit to the appeal that was filed by Daniel when he was trying to get a new trial, a fair trial, based on, false witness testimony from Elaine Taylor and the misbehavings of Galen Gigger and lies, kind of stories, fibs, whatever you want to call it. And so Dr. Spence has a lot of credentials and very, very well qualified. And so we're going to talk about what he had to say regarding Galen Gigger and Elaine Taylor and the DNA and things like that, and the testing and the testimony in Daniel's trial. Well, we're going to start by reintroducing, if you remember, Erica Fuchs, and we're going to start by a little introduction with her, and we actually have a few of her interview videos also to share with you tonight. So a little bit about Erica. Erica Fuchs is a biologist from Iowa who became involved in the effort to free Daniel Holtzclaw when she noticed and raised awareness of the state's forensic science errors at the heart of the conviction. Erica earned her bachelor's degree in biology from Harvard University and her MS from Iowa State University. She has performed DNA cloning, sequencing, and genetic engineering in university research labs. She also volunteered and worked as a victim's advocate for survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. Erica is now a board member of the nonprofit Uncuff the Innocent. The nonprofit was incorporated in 2017 by Erica and 4 former police officers. 2 of the board members are exonerees who spent more than 20 years wrongfully incarcerated. The nonprofit is currently financially aiding Daniel Holtzclaw, Michael Oxley, Timothy Wright Jr., and J.B. Van Story. So that's just a little bit about Erica. We'll start this evening by giving you a little introduction about Erica. Well, not a little introduction, but her opinion of the Oklahoma City Crime Lab and how she feels about it. And it's not a very pleasant opinion that she shares about the Oklahoma City Crime Lab. This is Erica Fuchs.
The OCPD DNA lab has a troubled history because one of the worst forensic analysts in the world worked there, Joyce Gilchrist, and led to many people being wrongfully convicted, even ending up on death row. My concern is that if we don't pay attention to history, we will repeat what has happened. And I think that has occurred in Daniel Holtzclaw's case, because once again, we've seen some members of the government wanting to pretend that there were no errors and not allow the public to understand that a forensic analyst was incorrect. I would hope that the Attorney General and the district attorneys would look back at what happened with Joyce Gilchrist and realize more important than getting convictions is making sure that forensic science is presenting the truth, as much of it as you can know. And then that would really help in cases to make sure that defendants get fair trials. In Daniel's case, the errors were substantial enough that the 6 internationally renowned forensic scientists who went public with their report concluded that Daniel did not receive a fair trial and his convictions should be overturned so that he can have a new trial free from forensic science errors. And I agree with their conclusion wholeheartedly.
Okay. Cherie has once again made some amazing slides, and then I kind of came behind her and added my little 2 cents of different little pictures and things like that. The credit goes to Cherie and Kay for helping out with links and editing, and for Cherie putting it all together to start with. Right now, you're going to get all Rhonda reading all of these slides. So sit back and enjoy, and hopefully you can learn something. Hopefully I'll be joining you in the chat so that I can help answer what I can, or even more, hopefully Dr. Silkman will be in our chat and he'll be able to really, really help you out with some answers to questions that you might have. So with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start. Hashtag 15, 7th DNA forensic expert, Dr. Michael Spence. A 7th DNA forensic expert, Dr. Michael Spence, determined that OCPD crime lab analyst Elaine Taylor's testimony about the so-called smoking gun DNA evidence in Holtzclaw's case was illogical, disingenuous, disingenuous, and profoundly irresponsible. Those are some pretty harsh words. Harsh but true. These are just a couple of pictures of Dr. Spence. He must be a very humble man because I could only find a few pictures of him, and those were 2 of them. But he has a website. It's called Spence Forensic Resources, SpenceForensics.com. And I've been to the website and I didn't really see anything. So I don't know if he's just getting it started or if he started it and, got sidetracked. And, he might be one of those that gets distracted by squirrels and shiny objects. So at any rate, just check there and see if maybe at some point he does, get some things up on his website. So Dr. Spence has a master's degree in science and a doctorate in molecular genetics. He specializes in forensic DNA analysis and has worked on over 800 forensic DNA cases. Dr. Spence has testified in many different trials as an expert witness, and most of those have been for the defense. However, the affidavit and the opinion that he wrote in favor of Daniel is obviously in his work that he did for the defense in this. On February 1st of 2017, Daniel's appellate attorney filed an application for an evidentiary hearing on Sixth Amendment claims. The Sixth Amendment claims were based on ineffective assistance of counsel at trial. And that's what a lot of Dr. Spence's opinions are about, as well as the faulty testimony and faulty and misrepresented DNA. But also the ineffective assistance of counsel is all over the place with Daniel's case. And we'll talk a little bit about some of that throughout some of these slides. Dr. Michael Spence submitted an affidavit in support of one of the claims regarding OCPD lab analyst Elaine Taylor's and ADA Gigger's misrepresentation of the DNA evidence at trial and defense attorney Scott Adams' failure to challenge it. As we'll find out in future slides, he really did kind of blow it, and he really did drop the ball, and kind of Daniel and I would definitely call it ineffective assistance of counsel, because there was a lot of things that he could have done to help Daniel's case, and he really didn't do much or enough. Dr. Spence argued that defense attorney Adams was ineffective because he failed to challenge those misrepresentations by not objecting to those misrepresentations, not utilizing an already paid for DNA expert during the trial to counter the misrepresentations, and not thoroughly cross-examining Elaine Taylor about the misrepresentations. And those are all pretty legit complaints, ineffective assistance of counsel claims. So the scientific results promoting Daniel's conviction, they were composed of data from 4 evidence items 17Q1, 17Q2, 17Q3, and 17Q4. All were swabs collected from the inner and outer surfaces of the fly of Daniel's uniform hands. Accuser Adara Gardner alleged that she had been digitally and vaginally assaulted by Daniel. The presence of her DNA within the results from the 4 swabs is not in dispute. However, during the trial, Taylor and ADA Giger made observations and conclusions about DNA that were not scientifically accurate, misrepresenting what the evidence meant. Just going to show you here. These are Daniel's actual pants here. And I can't see my cursor because I don't know why. But in this top left one here, you have 17Q2. That is the outside of the inside flap of his pants, and the smaller rectangle on your left. And you can't, I'm not sure how well you can see it on your screen, but right along smaller black rectangle, you can see the zipper of Daniel's uniform pants. And then, of course, the right side, longer rectangle is 17Q1, and that's the outside of the zipper of the fly of his pants. And then in the picture down below, you have 17Q3, which is the inside of 17Q2, where the zipper is. It's a swatch of fabric in there. And then, of course, 17Q4 is the inside fabric from the opposite side of 17Q1. That's Daniel's actual uniform pants. All of the swabs were collected from the inner and outer surfaces of the fly of Daniel's uniform pants. There were flaws in scientific information presented during the trial, and that's why we're here. Potential for DNA transfer. For example, the quantities of DNA observed within the samples from the fly of the pants were quite consistent with the expected transfer of epithelial cells during incidental handling events. While Adams did ask Taylor whether Gardner's DNA could have gotten on Daniel's pants via secondary transfer, and she replied that she could not disagree, he didn't go any further than that. Such a pivotal fact needed to be vigorously emphasized and driven home to the jury. So here is a little more from Erica Fuchs.
There are several articles that show that Mr. Giger's belief that DNA transfer does not happen, that belief is incorrect and does not match the science. There's a study by Sarah Jones and Kirsty Scott that came out in 2010 in the journal Science and Justice. And this study discovered that a woman's non-intimate skin cell DNA from her face and hands could transfer to a man's hands when he touched them briefly, and then to the underwear of the man, and even all the way to his genitals. So that proves that Mr. Giger's statement is incorrect when he was claiming that this explanation of innocent DNA transfer via Daniel's hands is impossible. A second study by Helmus and others, which was published online October 27 of 2015, which is just before the trial, found that you could actually have skin cell DNA transfer from a person's neck, rubbed for 5 seconds with a piece of cloth, and then the cloth was handed to a second person. It then got under the person's hands, and then that second person touched a second piece of cloth, and that second piece of cloth then found the initial person's from the neck DNA on that second piece of cloth. So this is called tertiary transfer, and that could match what happened in Daniel's case, where he was said to have touched possessions, a bag belonging to this teenaged accuser, and then would have had to urinate during his 10-hour shift, I believe it was. And in fact, I think he's probably often having to go to the restroom, and police officers don't necessarily stop at a store to use the restroom. They may have to go by the side of the road when you're not even when you have to stop people quickly and go on chases. You're not going to necessarily have time to go to a restroom. So he would have to unzip the fly of his pants and urinate very quickly right there, which would give ample opportunity for his hands to touch the fly of his pants while urinating. A third study is by Kale and others, and that was published online September 2015, also before the trial. And this study found that if you shake hands with a second individual and then touch a knife and then swab the knife to see the DNA that you find, you can actually find DNA belonging to the person whose hands you shook, but not your own hands when you handle the knife. So as an analogy to what could have happened in Daniel's case, on the fly of his pants, he could have transferred DNA from another person with whom he came in contact, but on the fly of his pants, he may not have left sufficient quantities of his own DNA for it to be identified during testing.
Inaccurate testimony suggesting the absence of male DNA. Taylor was allowed without challenges from the defense to testify that male DNA was absent from items 17Q3 and 17Q4. ADA Giger to Elaine Taylor on the witness stand. ADA Giger, did you find evidence of male DNA at either of these locations? Elaine Taylor, there's no why, so the answer is no. ADA Giger, there's none there, so even though Officer Holtzclaw was wearing these pants, his DNA was not inside them, correct? Elaine Taylor, that's correct. This testimony is inaccurate and prejudicial. Her own reports indicate that there was male DNA on both of these items. Inaccurate testimony excluding Daniel misrepresented claims of vaginal secretions. Taylor was allowed to testify without challenges that Daniel was excluded as a contributor to all 4 swabs. ADA Giger then suggested the reason why Adara's DNA and not Daniel's was on his pants was because skin cells are much more likely to be transferred if they are contained in liquids such as vaginal fluid. Elaine Taylor, that's a very good possibility. This testimony is enormously inaccurate and prejudicial. Taylor's own notes state DNA profile from item 17Q2 is a mixture and the minor component is not suitable for comparison purposes due to insufficient data. Thus, the result was inconclusive, meaning she could not exclude Daniel, yet she told the jury that she did. Finally, nothing in Taylor's reports indicated the presence of vaginal fluid.
To address all the factual errors in it and also point out what is true. The overall issue here is that Prosecutor Georgir has misrepresented the DNA evidence in Daniel's case, and I'm concerned that a prosecutor who has done that is also the one who, in recent secret hearings, has been questioning the people at the hearings about Elaine Taylor's personnel records. I don't believe that someone who has misrepresented the DNA evidence, not only in the trial and to the public, is able to understand the evidence enough to realize whether there are errors in it or not, because his statements to me are internally inconsistent and irrational. So to the public on February 5th, 2016, in a TV news report, he said this.
The DNA evidence were skin cells. The skin cells were transferred through the body fluids of a 17-year-old girl after he raped her. That's what the evidence was. That's what the jury heard. And certainly that's what they convicted him of.
Some people say they're skin cells. They could have been from anywhere.
They tried to explain DNA from a 17-year-old girl that ends up inside his pants at the areas where his privates are. Quite frankly, their explanation was not believable because you can't explain that.
So those are Mr. Giger's understandings of the evidence and the trial. And the part that he is correct about is that the jury did hear that the evidence was that there was vaginal fluid, because that's what Mr. Giger told them in the closing argument when he misrepresented the evidence. We've already heard the statement that Elaine Taylor made during the trial, which was that scientifically she cannot tell how the DNA transferred to the fly of the pants. So Mr. Giger should have known the evidence does not allow him to make the statement to the public that there is vaginal fluid. And I would like to ask him what made him make that statement when it's not consistent with the evidence his own DNA analyst presented. He also said that the jury convicted Daniel because of this evidence that there supposedly was vaginal fluid. And that part, I would agree with Mr. Giger, because DNA evidence and forensic evidence in a jury trial is so important to jurors that any kind of misrepresentation of it will have a high impact on their decisions for the verdict. And there have been studies that have looked at this issue. There's a report by 6 internationally known scientists that was published because of their concerns about how scientific issues and flaws in the science, in Daniel's case, impacted the verdict. And they did research, reported on research that shows that jurors often overvalue the weight of DNA evidence, even when it lacks probative value, meaning the weight of the evidence, how important it is to deciding whether a crime occurred. And this is especially true in circumstantial cases, which would be cases where you don't have, say, a video of the crime happening. You just have little bits of evidence that don't directly prove there was a crime. And any kind of misrepresentation of DNA evidence is going to make the jurors feel that a crime occurred, especially when they're told something like there's vaginal fluid when there wasn't. Back to the statement that Prosecutor Georgir made, he said the cells were transferred through the body fluids of a 17-year-old girl. That is false. Like we talked about, there was no evidence of body fluid. So you can't say definitively that there was body fluid there. If you don't test for something, you can't say that it's there. But they didn't see anything that suggested vaginal fluid, no white stains, nothing that would make them think it was there. So it was completely speculation on his part that vaginal fluid was present. Another part of his statement, which I take exception to, and the 6 internationally known scientists, they all felt that the evidence showed there was a valid non-sexual explanation for the DNA found on the fly of Daniel's pants. And that explanation is non-intimate DNA transfer. So this is the sort of transfer that Mr. Georgir is telling the public is simply not possible. He said it's not a reasonable argument to claim that DNA could transfer from a teenager to her purse, for example, to Daniel's hands and to the fly of the pants. But these 6 internationally renowned scientists have looked at the evidence and they know about the studies that show that DNA transfers very readily from our hands to objects we can touch. But it's not always consistently transferring. So sometimes you may touch an object and you don't leave DNA, but sometimes you may.
So, inaccurate testimony suggesting the absence of male DNA, Taylor was allowed without challenges from the defense to testify that male DNA was absent. Daniel misrepresented claims of vaginal secretions. Taylor was allowed to testify without challenges that Daniel was excluded as contributor. This testimony is enormously inaccurate and prejudicial. Taylor's own notes state DNA from item 17QD is a mixture and the minor component is not suitable for comparison purposes due to the insufficient data. Thus, the result was inconclusive, meaning she could not exclude Daniel, yet she told the jury she did. Finally, nothing in Taylor's report indicated the presence of vaginal fluid.
I was just talking about this issue of whether Daniel's DNA could be found on the fly of his pants, because we talked about how in all 4 samples of DNA from the fly of the pants, there was actually male DNA of unknown origin. We don't know for sure the male or males from whom that came. And Prosecutor Georgir has made a statement on December 13th, 2016 in a Channel 4K4 news clip that shows once again he does not understand the evidence.
If what they are trying to get people to believe, which is not accurate, is that it could transfer from a purse to hands to pants to inside of pants. Significantly, Daniel Holtzclaw's own DNA was not found on the inside of his uniform pants. I think that speaks probably louder than anything I could argue as to the ability of someone's skin cells from their hands to get transferred to a piece of fabric.
We talked about articles that show, in fact, DNA can transfer from a person's hands to objects. This has been known for over 20 years. So that part's an error. But the other part that's an error is when Mr. Georgir claims that Daniel's DNA was not found on the fly of the pants. He got this claim from his DNA analyst, Elaine Taylor, who testified in the trial that Daniel was excluded from contributing DNA to all 4 samples of the fly of the pants. And Prosecutor Giger's argument then in the trial was that if you can't find Daniel's DNA, then surely that would mean he didn't touch the fly of the pants with his hands, and therefore DNA matching the teenager on the fly couldn't have come from Daniel's hands, otherwise you would have found Daniel's DNA. That argument is flawed, and it breaks down for several reasons. Number one, Elaine Taylor was incorrect when she argued that you could exclude Daniel from being a contributor to the fly of the pants. Most obviously, in the 2 interior samples where there was a Y chromosome that she failed to disclose during the trial, or in her written report about her findings, that Y chromosome with a low level of it present could have come from Daniel, but they did no testing of the Y chromosome to see if its alleles matched what you'd expect from Daniel. So it was simply wrong to conclude that there was no DNA from Daniel because they could not tell that. The results were actually inconclusive. For the 2 outer samples from the fly of the pants, those were mixtures of at least three or more people. When you have complex DNA mixtures, that would be mixtures from at least 3 people, it is not possible to conclusively say that a person is excluded from contributing, because actually many alleles that matched Daniel's DNA profile were found in those 2 samples, just not all of his alleles. And so we don't know, was it that his DNA was not there at all, or was his DNA there at low levels so that only some of the alleles that matched Daniel were detected? The conclusion should be that it's inconclusive as to who contributed to those samples and whether he could be excluded or not. In Elaine Taylor's written reports, for 3 of the samples, the second one, which was partially inside, and then the 3rd and 4th from the inside, she correctly wrote in her report that the data were inconclusive as to whether the contributors who contributed very little DNA were a particular person or not. So she was correct for those samples in saying it was inconclusive as to who those minor contributors could be. But for the exterior sample, which was a mixture of many people's DNA at approximately equivalent levels, during her written report, she actually stated that Daniel Holtzclaw could be excluded. And I feel that was an error from what I've read about forensic analysis of DNA mixtures. When you have a mixture where there are many alleles present from a variety of people at approximately equal level, you just can't tell whom they came from, especially when there are some lower level alleles, not at high levels, where it's possible that not all of the person's alleles were detected. So she made this error in her written report, but then especially in the trial, she contradicted her written report statement that there were inconclusive results, when in the trial she claimed that Daniel was excluded as a contributor. Mr. Giger, however, latched on to her argument that there was no DNA from Daniel, and then he, like he said to the press in December of 2016, used this claim that Daniel's DNA was not present to argue against the possibility that Daniel just innocently transferred DNA from the teenager and others on the fly to the fly of the pants through his hands. A final error that Mr. Giger made is revealed in a December 2016 statement he made to the press, to K4 News. And he was talking about his belief that vaginal fluid was found, and yet simultaneously he believed that there was no test for vaginal fluid. So he said a very peculiar, internally inconsistent statement.
Fluid containing the skin cells is absorbed into the pants, and that's what we have. If Mr. Holtzclaw or his supporters are advocating that there is a test that determines that this is vaginal fluid, they are lying. There is no test that does that.
So this is incorrect for several reasons. Like we said, there was no testing done to see if there was vaginal fluid. However, in fact, there is a presumptive test for vaginal fluid. There's at least one lab in the US that can do a presumptive test. A presumptive test means if you get a positive result, it could come from vaginal fluid, but there are other stains or liquids that could give that positive result also. However, it is a test that can be done. And alternate light sources are useful for even detecting if there's any kind of staining at all that's not visible to the naked eye, and that was not done. So that could have been done too, to try to see if there was any kind of fluid. So the statement is very odd because on the one hand, Mr. Giger's giving his speculative claim that there was fluid that absorbed into the fly of the pants, presumably vaginal fluid, because he's arguing in favor of there having been a rape. But then he acknowledges there's no test for vaginal fluid. So how can you claim you have vaginal fluid when there was no way to test for it? That makes no logical sense. It's completely unscientific. So this is an example of why I would worry about Mr. Giger for the state of Oklahoma being the one to have any kind of legitimate ability to question scientists about what the evidence was and whether the evidence, the DNA evidence, was significant, because I don't believe he understood it.
I don't know about you guys, but I take great offense at Dalen Giger referring to Daniel and his supporters as liars, because he is the liar. Harsh words, I know, but it's true. So I'm very offended by his liar comment. Very. Talk about disingenuous. If we looked up disingenuous in the dictionary, we'd probably find his picture in there. Okay, so no vaginal secretions on key evidence items. In the U.S., there is only one presumptive test used to assess the potential presence of vaginal secretions: alternate light source, ALS. Taylor did not use this test. However, she does say that she used a brightly lit, I believe are the words, high power magnifying glass. That is not an alternate light source. That's just another attempt from Elaine Taylor to make it sound like she knows what she's talking about and that she did the right tests and whatnot. But I think we all would argue with that. Okay. Yet Taylor repeatedly speculated that such secretions were present. A young woman of her age would be very likely to have quite a bit of lubrication, and that lubrication could transfer cells during rape. And that is from the trial transcripts. She just contradicts herself all over the place, and so does Galen Giger. We still have defense counsel Scott Adams, who, sitting by, offered no objection to this misleading testimony. He failed to question her on cross about the lack of foundation for such a claim, and failed to offer his already paid for DNA expert to rebut this testimony. These failures then allowed ADA Giger to assert in his summation that the DNA on Daniel's fly came from the walls of Adara's vagina and was transferred in vaginal fluids. That is from the trial transcripts as well. We bring you the real stuff here. Okay, this is just a couple of close-up pictures of the pants in question, the uniform pants. A little bit bigger here, but we have the 17Q2, 17Q1. This is Q1 here. This is Q2. Q1 is the very outside of the pants. This right here is the zipper, kind of goes screw thingy right there. And then this is smaller rectangle here is the outside of the inside flap of the uniform pants. And then 17 through Q3, this is the fabric that is on the opposite side of 17Q2. This is that fabric flap that's in there by the zipper. And then, of course, this is the 17Q4, which is on the opposite side of 17Q1, and that's the fabric that is on the inside. And these 3Q or Q3 and Q4 are the ones that are on the inside of Daniel's pants. Now, these two tests were not done at the same time. I believe it was Giger at some point after these tests were run. He asked to have these done at a later time. And I don't know the time frame or why or anything else other than he just maybe as an afterthought thought, oh, we better do that. I don't know. I have no idea why he would do that. But anyway, we don't have a lot of ideas why a lot of prosecutors do a lot of things they do. It's pointless to try to guess. But I just know that I believe he was hoping to get those before trial, which he did. Okay, alleles observed within the item 17Q1 DNA mixture. And again, this is 17Q1, the front outside front of Daniel's uniform pants. There was at least one entirely unknown DNA contributor to that mixture, just in here. One entirely unknown DNA contributor to that mixture. Adams should have employed this fact as an enormous counter-argument to the prosecution's misguided assessment that secondary DNA transfer was unlikely and that the DNA mixture must have originated from vaginal secretions.
Okay, alleles observed with an item 17q2, the DNA mixture. Adara Gardner's DNA was present on this item. There was at least 14 unaccounted for alleles on this item as well. They present the same argument as those on 17q1. Again, this is 17q2, outside, inside, flap, there's the zipper, and then what you can't see here, which we showed in the last slide, is 17q1. And on 17q3, the alleles that were observed within this item, DNA mixture. Genetic material on this item included male DNA. It also included a small quantity of Miss Gardner's DNA. Also present were 7 alleles that could not have originated from her. All but one of the alleles were classified as below threshold, meaning they were weak allelic signals. All but one of these weak signals were consistent with Daniel's DNA profile. This was exposing Taylor's disingenuous testimony that Daniel was excluded rather than that the rest were inconclusive data. Sly one, isn't she? I think she is. Okay, and then finally 17q4, and this is the inside of the pants. Fabric. This also included a male contributor and a small quantity of Ms. Gardner's DNA. 10 alleles were unaccounted for. All but one were consistent with Daniel's profile, thus not excluding him, but indicating the test was inconclusive. And we all know when you have something that is contradictory in that way, then you must call it inconclusive, which means it cannot be used in court against the defendant, unless you're Daniel Holztclaw or Stephen Avery, of course. Okay, quantifying the recovery of DNA from the evidence. It's true that a substantial yield of female DNA couldn't justify speculation that vaginal secretions were present, but only modest quantities were found on the fly swabs. Relatively low volumes of vaginal secretions can provide an abundance of cells and high yields of DNA, but no such DNA yield results were reported from the 4 swabs.
Okay, I'm going to share my little video of the because I'm just so proud of it, of the juror that did speak out. I don't think it's the one that Nosy was talking about, but it's the other guy. I looked at Ron Hill's interview, and I don't know, I got a funky weird vibe from that dude, and I just haven't decided how I want to share his. But here's my fun little one that I made for this Daniel Speaks.
We're still fighting together, but it's torn us up in our hearts because we know that Daniel is innocent.
The jury acquitted Daniel in 5 of the 13 cases, including Shardarian Hill, who said she was raped in a hospital bed, and Carla Raines, who 7 times denied she had been assaulted before changing her story. The jury did convict Holtzclaw in 8 cases, including Janie Liggins, where the only evidence was her word in a grainy visual of the traffic stop. They also believe 17-year-old Adara Gardner, whose DNA was on Daniel's fly.
Well, I mean, I'm not a DNA expert. They told us it was DNA from the vaginal fluid from a 17-year-old. The DNA people are pretty boring, to be honest with you.
In the case of Sherry Ellis, who said her attacker was short and black, and the GPS did not match her story, Holtzclaw was convicted on all counts. On Ellis's case alone, Holtzclaw got 63 years. Tabitha Barnes, who testified on PCP, Holtzclaw was convicted on 3 of 5 counts.
Sometimes you wonder, I mean, with the stuff you hear, did we get it right? I mean, honestly, I think we did.
Is this how the criminal justice system is supposed to work in America? Why is it that they just sort of picked and chose who to believe, not based on the evidence or the facts?
We took it count by count, went over it, discussed it, guilty or not guilty and put it in a pile. We didn't split the baby.
Some jurors admitted they were concerned by the outside disruptions, but Speaks insists it did not impact their verdict.
The subject was never breached that if we don't find him guilty, there's going to be riots like Ferguson.
For Daniel Holtzclaw, his only hope is a favorable appeal, one based on a number of issues, including the subject of misrepresented DNA, what they call the circus atmosphere, and disruptions that pervaded throughout the trial, an unconstitutionally excessive sentence, in a jury that the defense says didn't look at each count on its separate merit.
How far will you go to get your brother a new trial?
I always said I will not give up, and until the whole world hears my outcry, I will keep on going. I will never give up fighting for Daniel.
I am still waiting for my Academy Award nomination for my little video. That was fun. It was fun to do that. Okay, back to the seriousness though of what we're talking about today. Let me get back there. Okay. And here we go.
Serve justice. Anyway, so quantifying the recovery of DNA from the evidence continued. Item 6A, a swab from Daniel's car door handle, yielded about the same quantity of DNA as was present on item 17Q1. But item 6A yielded 4 to 4.5 times greater amount of DNA than the amount on the other 3 swabs. Logic tells us that DNA on a door handle comes from the typical use of a door handle, handling it, touching, contact activity, opening, closing the door, normal things that you would do, right? Because the defense did not have their DNA expert witness to counter Taylor's testimony, she was never forced to report to the jury DNA yield from the various items collected in Daniel's case. Horrible. Mishandling of the uniform pants. Now, we have watched that video until we could probably see it in our nightmares at night. So I'm not going to show you any of that, of course, and I'm definitely not going to show you the picture, but we remember in an earlier hashtag the improper way that Rocky Gregory collected Daniel's pants and belt, using his bare hands to open the bag and putting both the pants and the belt together in one bag. Taylor, and you can tell, if that's in dispute, we can look at the evidence pictures of the items 17Q 1, 2, 3, and 4, because the belt is clearly still looped through the uniform pants. So we know they were together. Taylor continued to handle the evidence improperly when she failed to take a substrate control sample from either the pants or the belt. Substrate control involves analysis of surface where one would not expect to find incriminating biological materials or incriminating DNA, such as the waistband or pockets. If remnants of her DNA were found on these relatively incidental areas, such a finding would support the probability of inadvertent transfer events. Scientific support that went unutilized during the trial. I wonder what that could mean. I know exactly what it means. Okay, principles of DNA transfer. Low-cards exchange principle. And I'm betting most of you in our chat tonight know exactly what that is. Low-cards exchange principle says every contact leaves a trace. I should have looked it up. I don't know exactly, but maybe Dr. Silkman, if he's in the chat, or somebody else can tell me exactly when this was discovered or made this principle known, but every contact leaves a trace. Today's DNA technology can produce a full profile from less than half of 1/1,000,000,000 of a gram of DNA. I can't even fathom what that is. Maybe we can talk about it in the next couple slides and hopefully explain it a little bit. To recover this much, an analyst needs fewer than 100 cells. A single drop of human blood contains about 400,000 DNA-containing cells. A single drop of saliva, 500,000 salivary epithelial cells. A single drop of semen contains 3 million spermatozoa, and the average human sheds 36 million skin cells during 1 single minute. Nasty when you think about it. Forensic DNA analysis. What do PCR and STR stand for, and how are they used in forensic DNA analysis? PCR is polymerase chain reaction, a copying process that is repeated so that a small number of DNA molecules can be reliably increased up to billions within several hours. STR is short tandem repeat, a process that evaluates specific regions, which are loci, that are found on nuclear DNA. The variable polymorphic nature of the STR regions that are analyzed for forensic testing intensifies the discrimination between one DNA profile and another. For example, the likelihood that two individuals, except identical twins, will have the same 13 loci DNA profile can be as high as 1 in 1 billion or greater. How PCR process and STR testing was used in Daniel's case. After the OCPD lab quantified the DNA, they used a small quantity of the DNA and the PCR process, making many, many copies of particular genetic sequences on the chromosomes. They then used the STR process to detect which genetic sequences were present and compared those results to the DNA profiles of some of the accusers, Carrie, who was Daniel's girlfriend, as well as Daniel. Now here, Cherie has provided a little visual here that, simple as it might look, kind of helps me tie it together and make sense. So this is nothing to do with Daniel's case. It's just one that she found, just an example that she found from this website down here, Bite Size. I have to wait for that little bar to go away. bitesizebio.com. So this would be a crime scene right here. And if we were relating this to Daniel or making an analogy to Daniel's case, the samples that were taken from his pants, the fly of his pants, would be the crime scene. If someone's here, he might want to correct me if I'm not correct. So what they're looking for from their suspects or their accusers in Daniel's case is items or swabs to come back that are going to match this crime scene perfectly. And so suspect 1 or accuser 1 doesn't match exactly. Suspect 2, this is an exact match. So this and this are probably had some sort of contact at some point. And then, of course, suspect 3, there's no match there either. So that's just a little visual to help you with PCR a little bit. Remarkable sensitivity of DNA testing. So how much is 1 nanogram? And we kind of talked about this a couple slides back. So this is going to help you to visualize in your mind's eye or in your mind or however you need to do it. What is the amount of 1 nanogram? So if the idea is if you took a package of artificial sweetener, and I don't know if I put Sweet and Low in there because that's the one I know the most, that packet of artificial sweetener weighs 1 gram by itself. So if we were to open the packet and take out 1/100th and discard the rest, the pile that was left over would be 1 milligram of sweetener. Now, if we set aside 1/1000th of that 1 milligram and discard the rest of it, that new amount is 1 microgram, which is 1 million times less than an original packet and cannot be seen without a microscope. So if we set aside 1/1000th of that and discard the rest, this is a nanogram. And that is 1 billion times less than the original packet. I can't even, my mind doesn't even compute that. But I thought it was a good analogy. How much DNA was in the samples taken from Daniel's fly? Well, the DNA in the 4 samples taken from the fly of the pants was quantified by Taylor, so who knows, right? Meaning they calculated the concentration of DNA in the liquid samples. However, Taylor's bench notes do not tell the volume of liquid in each sample, assuming a 50 micrometer volume, which is the standard for each sample, and using the DNA concentration provided by the OCPD, we calculated that the actual quantity of DNA ranged from around 40 nanograms. There's that mind-boggling amount there. From around 40 nanograms in the sample from the outside of the fly, which had DNA from at least 3 people, to down to around 10 nanograms in each of the samples from the inside fly, to which there were at least 2 contributors. At least 1 contributor in each of the 4 samples from the fly of the pants was male, despite what Miss Taylor says. Now, scientific literature supporting the reality of transfer DNA. Imagine that. There's scientific literature to back this up and support it. Somebody needs to let Galen Gigger know that, don't they? DNA typing itself cannot tell us how the DNA arrived where it was detected. So they just can't say. I mean, they do say, and I'm not even going to say that they speculate. I am a lot more cynical than that. I'm just going to say they flat out lie about it. Because they by now they've got the jury completely confused, and of course everybody on the state side is on their side, and then everybody, most of the spectators in the courtroom are not there to support Daniel. They're there to support these women, and so all of the lies and half-truths and misrepresentations and no truths and whatever you want to call them that Taylor and Gigger were spilling out to the jury, they were probably just buying it, just eating it up, just believing every little last word of it. Clearly, because we know how this ends. So forensic biologist Susanna Ryan in 2009. Susanna Ryan, by the way, she's in one of Michelle Malkin's interviews. She's talking to the forensic scientist. So that's who Susanna Ryan is. She says, since so many of the available journal articles, this is 2009, since so many of the available journal articles present conflicting information, more work is needed to see how likely it is to both transfer and detect DNA in a secondary or even tertiary fashion, especially considering the sensitivity of modern forensic DNA analysis. Forensic trace DNA experts Orshot, Valentine, and Mitchell in 2010. Greater effort needs to be made by police and crime investigators to investigate how the DNA sample arrived at the location where it was found, as well as by scientists to understand the impact of activities on their relative amounts of DNA from particular sources at a crime scene. Forensic scientists Alison, Jamieson, and Georgina Meakin in 2010. The examination of evidence for handler DNA can reveal DNA of people who have not handled the item. The stronger profile may or may not be the person who last handled the item. An inference of direct contact between an individual and the item may or may not be supportable depending on the circumstances of the case. In other words, we did not know enough to make any sensible scientific judgments on as to how DNA came to be on the item. Doesn't stop some people. They're going to talk it anyway, right? Kratz comes to mind. Gigger comes to mind. Taylor comes to mind. Joyce Gilchrist comes to mind. These are all corrupt people. So frequently, Jamieson and Meakin said in 2010, frequently the underlying hypothesis is that touching or direct contact is a more likely scientific explanation for the finding of a DNA profile on an item than an indirect contact. I don't know about you guys, but doesn't that just kind of sound logical? I mean, you don't even have to know anything about DNA. That just is a logical hypothesis to me. This is to the extent that it may be described as providing extremely strong support for direct versus indirect transfer. In our view, such an opinion on DNA transfer is not a supportable opinion based on case experience and available scientific research. They say it much nicer than I do, though. Again, from Jamieson and Meakin in 2013, DNA-bearing material can come to be on a surface by either direct or indirect transfer. And here's a little definition of the two. Direct transfer includes contact, but also includes activities within the vicinity of an item that may result in the transfer of DNA directly from an individual without any contact, such as through speaking, coughing, sneezing, all those kinds of things. Indirect transfer of DNA is when DNA from an individual comes to be on an item via an intermediary surface. It's important to consider indirect transfer in the evaluation of trace DNA in casework. Well, don't tell Galen Gigger because he'll call you a liar. Jamieson and Meakin continue. Several different terms have been coined to describe such DNA. For example, the term touch DNA has been used, but this can be misleading in two ways. Firstly, such a term infers that the DNA recovered from the surface got there via that surface being touched, but this is usually not known. And secondly, there is a misconception that touch DNA can only be detected by LT-DNA, which is low template DNA, through that technique. Okay, in conclusion, during the trial, defense attorney Adams failed to challenge that Taylor's sworn testimony contradicted her own lab records. No male DNA was found on either item 17Q3 or 17Q4, even though her records revealed otherwise, which was that Daniel was excluded and could not have contributed DNA to any of the surfaces of the fly of his own uniform pants, even though this contradicted her inconclusive assessment regarding item 17Q2 documented in her November 12, 2014 report. These vital contradictions served as a precursor for an illogical and disingenuous assessment of the DNA mixture results during the prosecution's closing arguments. The argument emphasized doubts that Daniel could have inadvertently facilitated any secondary transfer of Miss Gardner's DNA onto the fly of his uniform pants. It's astounding. The rationale for these doubts was the imaginary absence of male DNA on the fly surfaces, in addition to the reversal from inconclusive to the inaccurate assertion that Daniel should be excluded. Taylor and ADA Gigger collaborated in emphasizing that the source of Miss Gardner's DNA was most likely from the transfer of vaginal secretions during an alleged penile vaginal sexual assault. These summarized instances of speculation not only contradicted the scientific results, they defied the logic that wearers typically leave DNA on their frequently used garments. Defense counsel Adams did not question Taylor regarding the remarkably modest quantities of DNA recovered from 17Q1, 17Q2, 17Q3, and 17Q4. This was despite the fact that the analyst testified to the jury as follows. I quantitate it after it's extracted so I don't overload the system, and I can tell you the quantity. Why didn't you? In the event that a forensic DNA expert had been consulted, To assist with the scientific defense of Daniel, the jury would have experienced a balance of viewpoints. What does that even mean? We don't even know what that means, a balance of viewpoints. It doesn't exist anymore. Oh my goodness. For example, the quantities of DNA observed within the samples from the fly of the pants were quite consistent with the expected transfer of epithelial cells. Y'all are laughing at me, that's just mine. During incidental handling events. It is profoundly irresponsible for any scientist to testify that the transfer of vaginal secretions from the alleged victim to the fly on a pair of pants is somehow more probable than other mechanisms of DNA transfer. This is especially true when the same scientists offer this speculation without the benefit of any scientific hint that such secretions might actually be present, and no DNA quantitative data are available to support such questionable forms of speculation. Just big old words. Okay, so this, I'm going, all of this stuff up here at the top, that happened shortly before I decided or was ready to record. And I, excuse me, I was desperately trying to find this information and I couldn't find it. And I was reading over everything except for the parts that I wanted to find. And even though I was reading them and looking at them, I wasn't seeing what I was looking for. So I'm kind of going to just, I'm going to kind of go to the bottom of this where it says, it appears defense counsel Scott Adams chose to simply read from his expert's report rather than call him to the witness stand to testify verbally in front of the jury, even though he was already present in the courtroom and prepared to testify. Bad form, Mr. Adams, but that's just my opinion. Just Rhonda. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to kind of change my course a little bit, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to share this with you. I'll try. Let's see if we can get this on here for you to see without me having to jump through a gazillion hoops. So I'm going to kind of go over now, if you're okay with that, some of the things that I was kind of referring to in the slide that I didn't share with you. So, let's see. Oh, yeah, well, I don't know if you can see it or if y'all can see that, but it's there. So hopefully it'll work. So I took a great dislike to Judge Kuhn, who wrote this opinion after Dr. Spence had written such an amazing information. But let me get to where I can see it a little bit better. So there were many different, and I'll try to get a link for you for this opinion that the judge shared. And what I have is the opinion of you know, the claims that that Daniel's attorney was making, but these are just the judge's responses to them, and they were not good. They weren't kind, nice, decent, judge or fair remarks. They were downright ignorant and rude, in my opinion. I'm a little sensitive. So the appellant, in number 52, it says the appellant reiterates his claim that trial counsel should have called a defense DNA expert to rebut Taylor's testimony and bolster his own defense. That word bolster is just really frustrating from this judge, but whatever. He argues, Daniel, that the defense expert testimony would have been based on extent, relevant evidence available to trial counsel. In support, appellant provides the affidavit of Dr. Spence, a forensic biologist and DNA expert. And I'm going to read that whole paragraph. Spence reviewed the Oklahoma City Police Department forensic examination reports, including worksheets, analyst bench notes, electrovirograms, population statistical calculations, DNA extraction and quantification, law enforcement investigative reports, trial testimony transcripts, and evidence, all sources available to trial counsel.
little dig. In number 53, he says Spence, Avers, I don't know what that word is. I'll try to find out. I don't know how to even say it, pronounce it properly. That Taylor's testimony was not consistent with DNA data. Well, this judge does not like that Spence said that. And in a minute, I'm going to show you some more. I'm going to show you another one now where that becomes very clear. Boom, right there. Now this goes back a little bit farther than where we were starting at. It goes back to number 48, and we started, I think, on number 52. But let me just see if I've got that showing right now. Not. Still do not. Go about it this way. Oh my gosh! I just lost it all. Oh, darn it. I was hoping we would be able to. Oh, there we go. I got it up now. Okay, so I'm going to read to you all these little nice words in red. Number 48, appellant claims this cross-examination and argument were not enough. Generally, if there's no showing of incompetence, the fact that another lawyer would have followed a different course is not reason enough to find trial counsel ineffective. Levy State, 2018, Oklahoma, criminal case, blah, 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 blah. And this is quoting Schultz v. State, 1999, Oklahoma criminal case, 57, da, da, da. In there, appellant argues that trial counsel should have presented his own expert to refute Taylor's conclusions and characterizations of the evidence. Appellant argues that, oh gosh, this is just going to infuriate me, but maybe I'm overreacting. You guys decide. Appellant argues that Taylor's testimony that he was not a contributor to the DNA is not supported by Taylor's own results. Appellant also argues that Taylor should have been asked about the actual quantities of DNA found on the garment, which he claims were modest at best. Appellant supports this claim in part with extra record affidavits filled with his Rule 3.311 motion. As that information is not in the record, we do not consider it in determining the claim's merits. No record evidence supports his claim that Taylor's testimony about appellant's contribution to the DNA was inaccurate or that the quantity of DNA was modest and thus more likely to be the product of secondary transfer. Any decision not to challenge Taylor's claim that appellant was not a contributor was a reasonable strategic decision. I just need to read that again for myself. Any decision not to challenge Taylor's claim that the appellant, Daniel, was not a contributor was a reasonable strategic decision. I need to know exactly what that means because it's really offensive. So, the absence of his DNA lent credibility to appellant's defense that the material was the result of secondary transfer. Trial counsel elicited or used admissions that A. Taylor could not state the source of AG's DNA beyond calling it biological material. B. She did not know how it got onto appellant's pants. And C. The DNA could have been the result of secondary transfer. We cannot say from the trial record that appellant was prejudiced by trial counsel's failure to present an expert to specifically rebut Taylor's testimony. On this record, trial counsel was not ineffective for failing to present a defense DNA expert. Oh my gosh, that is so infuriating to me when I read that. And then I read already the other part. But to call, I mean, I'd like to hear what any of you in the chat might have to say about this whole strategic. What was it he said? Strategic Oh, I probably won't be able to find it again, but strategic decision. Any decision not to challenge Taylor's claim that appellant was not a contributor was a reasonable strategic decision. Help me. Somebody help me. Dr. Silkman, somebody, anybody help me understand that, because it just doesn't make any sense to me. So, gosh, there's a lot of information there, and I wish that I could say I feel like we have given you as much as we could, and we did. I mean, we could do more presentations like this, discussing this topic in this case. But those are some very, very basics. If you have any further questions about any of it, don't ask me, don't ask Kay, don't ask Cherie, because we don't know shit about DNA. All we know is what we read to you from these slides, what I read to you from these slides, and what little bit other things that we've read as well that mean as much to us as a lot of this. I mean, I get some basic ideas. I get the basic concepts and whatnot that are being told here and that Dr. Spence is talking about. But if we're going to start talking about the technicalities of DNA and forensic analysis and all that, I can't help you with that. I do know somebody who can. So, and usually Dr. Silkman really enjoys talking to others about DNA and trying to explain things to them. And I know he's a busy man, but hey, if you shoot him a question or maybe ask him a question there in chat, maybe he'll be able to answer it for you. So that's all we have for tonight. We want to thank you so much for watching. This has been an RKC production. Make sure before you leave, if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that bell, like and share this video, and tell all of your friends and family to come over to YouTube and just check out Just Rhonda and see if you can learn a little bit more about the Daniel Holtzclaw case. What we're giving you is the facts, ma'am, just the facts. So until next time, and I'm not promising a show next week, to a lot of holidays and family stuff going on, but we want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. For those of you who live in the States, if you just take 3 minutes out of your tomorrow, and just come over and leave a note to Daniel in the room for letters to Daniel, just leave him a note. Anything is so appreciated, and especially this time of year. And just let him know you're thinking of him at this time, and that you keeping good thoughts for him, and whatever you do, if you pray or whatever, just let him know that you're thinking of him and that you're hoping for the best holidays that he can possibly have. So to all of our friends, like I said, here in the United States, happy Thanksgiving. To all of our friends who are not in the United States and don't have a Thanksgiving at the same time that we do, in the same way that we do, you know what? Have a great week anyway. And we'll just see you in Discord, I hope. And until next time, see you later. Okay, so that is my premiere. That is my version of a premiere presentation. So thank you guys so much for coming and for paying attention through all that. It was hard to read it, just because if you don't know what you're really saying when you're reading stuff, it makes it kind of hard to read. And Kay and Cherie and I, we've all three been kind of going through all of that stuff and trying to make sense of it. And we get, like I said in the presentation, we kind of get some basics, but man, it is so much. And I think about cases where there's a lot of DNA to to go through and analyze. And somebody in the chat, I know you guys will know right off the top of your head how much how much forensic or DNA evidence there was in Stephen's case, but we're really, and it's over 100, if I'm not mistaken. And we're talking about really 4 pieces of major or only really evidence, DNA evidence or forensic evidence in Daniel's case, and that's the 17 Qs, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's the only thing that was really discussed and talked about, yet so many lies and misrepresentations were wrapped in it and around it that it just makes it feel like it was over 100, or at least it does to me. So Cherie, I don't recall, has been dropping the links for the affidavit, well, for the application that Daniel filed for the evidentiary hearing, and then also for the response from the court that goes afterwards. Oh my gosh, that response is it just invoked so much anger in me that I didn't read it word for word, every single bit of it, because it's a lot, but the pieces that I picked out and read definitely pissed me off. And I guess I don't expect a judge to be, kind and compassionate and caring when he's talking to what he believes, right or wrong or otherwise, is a convicted, rapist or sexual assault fiend or whatever. But the level of disrespect was also just as upsetting, and kind of reminded me of the different things, the responses that we've gotten from the courts in Stephen's case too. Just a lot of ignorance, and not ignorance in that way, but just discounting the way, when you read through the judge's whole entire response and the way he kind of discounts Dr. Spence. I was offended for Dr. Spence, because I just thought, man, it's not like he just, picked some local crime lab analyst or expert, in, southern Oklahoma or something. This is like this is what he does. This is what Dr. Spence does. And the other 6 that came before him on last week, these are credible experts. And so it's just really infuriating when I was reading through all that stuff to see how they just kind of, gave him the finger, really. At least that was my impression reading through it. It's just like keep giving him the finger the whole way through, the judge was, and really just pissed me off. So anyway, I want to thank you guys for coming tonight. I know it's for some people a difficult day because they're trying to get ready for a big meal tomorrow or getting ready to travel for one, except for you're supposed to be Zooming and only having 10 people. So it shouldn't be too big of a deal. More sarcasm. But anyway, thank you for coming. Please come to Discord and just leave a little note for Daniel, and tell him, that you're thinking about him right now and during the holiday seasons. And between Cherie and Kay and I, and Kat and Alice and Darkside, we will make sure that Daniel gets a note as quickly as we can. Kay isn't here tonight to kind of give you an update about Daniel. I don't know a lot of details, but I do know that there's a lot of positive cases where Daniel is. And so, as there are in many prisons in states and cities and counties across the country and the world, really. So, but a lot more. So please, definitely, keep them in your mind, all the inmates, so that, we don't want any of them getting sick and dying, of course. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody that participated in the chat. I told you I'm not promising a show next week. This right now is just with a lot of people, is just really crazy busy times right now. So if we do a live next week, it might just be something kind of short. I don't know. We'll see. It'll just be a surprise, just like the last couple of weeks have been. So thank you guys. Love you guys all. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.